weekend had finally arrived. After a long, exhausting month of meetings, deadlines, and the constant buzz of city life, all I wanted was a few days of silence. The kind of silence only nature could offer. My family ranch, located about 2 hours outside of town, had always been my sanctuary, with its rolling green pastures, wildflowers, and a pristine lake right at the edge of the woods. It was the perfect place to disappear for a while. And this time, I had something special. Planned I was going to camp right by the lake. Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I loaded up my truck with everything I'd need. My old canvas tent, a cooler full of food, a portable grill, sleeping bag, fishing rod, lanterns, firewood, and a stack of books I'd been meaning to read for months. I even packed my guitar, hoping to strum a few tunes under the stars like I used to. As I pulled away from the driveway and hit the open highway, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in weeks. The air already seemed fresher, the sky bluer. I had no plans of checking my phone, reading emails, or dealing with anyone from the outside world. Just me, my land, and peace. Arriving at the ranch felt like stepping into a different world. The creaky wooden gate welcomed me with a familiar sound as I drove down the gravel path toward the lake. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the hills, casting golden light across the water. I parked under the old oak tree, walked down to the lake's edge, and just stood there for a minute, breathing it all in. The air smelled like pine and earth. Birds were calling to each other across the trees. It was perfect. Setting up camp didn't take long. I pitched the tent a few feet from the shore, close enough to hear the gentle lap of water. I gathered some dry wood, started a fire in the fire ring we'd built years ago, and grilled a few skewers of marinated chicken I'd brought. As the sky darkened, stars emerged one by one, slowly taking over the night. I sat by the fire, warming, my hands in sipping on sweet tea, feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Around 10 p.m., I cast my fishing line into the lake, letting it rest while I played a soft melody on my guitar. The flames flickered beside me, dancing. With the wind, I could hear the crickets chirping, frogs croaking nearby, and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. There was no noise, no cars, no voices, just raw, natural beauty and the peace I had craved for so long. For a brief moment, I thought about how lucky I was to own this land, not just for its value, but for what it offered, solitude, memories, and a deep sense of belonging. This lake had been in my family for generations. I had fished here with my grandfather, skipped stones with my cousins, even brought my high school friends out here for summer cookouts. As an adult, it was my refuge. I turned in for the night with a full belly and a full heart. Inside the tent, I unzipped the side flap to let in the cool breeze, then curled into my sleeping bag. The moonlight filtered in, casting shadows across the canvas. As I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that what seemed like the perfect escape would take a bizarre, almost absurd turn the next day, one that would involve strangers, legal threats, flashing lights, and an HOA that didn't seem to understand. The concept of private property. The morning sun peeked through the trees, casting dappled light across my tent. Birds chirped overhead, and the scent of fresh pine and damp earth filled the air. I stretched, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside to greet the day. The lake shimmered in the golden morning light, calm and still, like a mirror reflecting the sky. I made a small breakfast, eggs, cooked over the fire, toast, and a mug of strong coffee brewed from a tin kettle. It was peaceful, too peaceful to imagine that anything could go wrong. But I was about to learn otherwise. Around mid-morning, while I was sitting on a log tying a new lure to my fishing line, I heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel road. That was odd. Nobody ever came out here unless they were invited. I stood up and looked toward the driveway entrance, where a dusty white SUV was slowly approaching. As it got closer, I noticed a familiar decal on the side Ocala HOA. That didn't make any sense. My ranch wasn't part of Ocala. In fact, it sat just outside the community's boundary line. something I had verified long ago when I bought the land. Still, the SUV rolled to a stop about 20 feet from my tent. Woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose. She had the unmistakable air of someone who was used to giving orders and not being questioned. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't even smile. "Excuse me?" she called out, voice sharp and clipped. "What exactly are you doing here?" Raised an eyebrow. "I'm camping," I said plainly. "This is my ranch. Is there a problem?" Her mouth tightened. "We received a complaint about unauthorized activity by the lake. A resident reported seeing a tent and smoke. This kind of behavior isn't in line with HOA regulations." I couldn't help but laugh, though politely. "Ma'am, this land is privately owned. It's outside the HOA jurisdiction. I'm the owner. There's no violation here." She didn't look convinced. "Now, do you have proof of ownership?" I walked over to the truck, opened the glove box, and pulled out a copy of the land deed I kept on hand. I handed it to her. She scanned it. Quickly, clearly not prepared for me to be so thorough. Her lips pursed further. "Well," she said after a pause, "we'll have to verify this with the board. In the meantime, I'd suggest taking down your camp. It's a bit unsightly from the road, but you understand, of course, we'd like to maintain a certain standard around here." I stared at her in disbelief. "From the road? You mean the road that's a full half-mile away and blocked by trees? You can't even see the lake from there." "That's not the point," she snapped. "It's about the image it sends. This type of activity could affect property values." I folded my arms. "What I do on my property, my legal property, has nothing to do with your HOA's concerns. You don't have any authority here." She gave me one last look, half irritation, half disdain, then turned and walked back to her SUV. "We'll be in touch," she said coldly, before driving off. I stood there dumbfounded. What had just happened? I thought the issue was over. Maybe a misunderstanding. Maybe someone from the HOA got confused about the boundaries. Still, a small part of me had an uneasy feeling. Something told me this wasn't the end of it. And unfortunately, that instinct would prove correct. By the next morning, I had almost put this strange encounter behind me. I told myself the woman had probably realized her mistake after reviewing the deed and talking to someone who actually understood the boundaries. I went about my day as planned took. The kayak out on the lake, caught a couple of trout, and even managed to finish half a book while lounging in a hammock I'd tied between two pines. The entire purpose of this trip was to disconnect and enjoy my land in peace. But as I soon learned, peace was the last thing the HOA had in mind. It was late afternoon when I heard the familiar crunch of tires again. This time it wasn't one vehicle-ite, it was three. A black pickup, a silver sedan, and another HOA-marked SUV pulled up along the gravel path, each one kicking up a small trail of dust. I got up and stood by my fire ring as the vehicles parked. In a row. Out stepped the same woman from the day before, along with two men in polos and khakis, and another woman who looked like she was taking pictures with her phone. None of them greeted me. "We're here to conduct a site review," woman from yesterday declared, as if I had invited them. "Given your continued presence, the board has decided to escalate the matter." I kept my expression neutral, though inside I could feel my blood starting to boil. "Again," I said slowly and clearly, "this is private land. I've shown you the deed. You have no legal right to be here." One of the men stepped forward. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a smug look on his face and a lanyard that read, HOA Security Consultant. He waved a paper in the air. "There's a clause in the Oak Hollow Charter," he said. "Any structures, temporary or permanent, visible from community roads must be pre-approved by the HOA board." I shook my head. That might apply to homes inside the neighborhood, but this property isn't part of Oak Hollow. It never has been. The original land survey excluded it from HOA governance. "I'm not subject to your charter." "You're being awfully defensive," the second woman said, still filming with her phone. "God, if you're doing nothing wrong, you shouldn't mind a few pictures." "That's called trespassing," I said flatly. "You're on my land without permission." That's not a site review. That's a violation of the law. The older man scoffed. We're documenting for the record. You'll be hearing from our legal team. I took a deep breath, struggling to remain calm. If you don't leave right now, you'll be hearing from the sheriff. For a moment, they hesitated. I could tell they weren't used to being challenged. In their world, HOA authority was absolute. They didn't know how to react when someone simply said no and had the legal paperwork to back it up. The lead woman folded her arms. It's fine, but if you won't cooperate with us, we'll have to handle this another way. This isn't over. They all got back in their cars, and the small convoy reversed down the gravel path, disappearing into a cloud of dust once more. I stood there in silence, staring at the tire tracks they left behind. That uneasy feeling I'd had yesterday was back, but stronger now. These people weren't just overstepping, they were obsessed with control. Something told me they were about to take it further. I turned back toward my tent and fire pit, shaking my head. It was hard to believe a peaceful camping weekend had somehow turned into a standoff with the homeowners. Association I didn't even belong to, as I added. Another log to the fire? I decided I'd have to keep my phone close, just in case this other way. They were planning turned into something truly ridiculous. I had no idea at the time just how ridiculous it would get. The next morning began like the others, calm, quiet, and beautiful. Mist floated gently across the lake's surface, and the early sunlight made everything glow like something out of a painting. I stood at the edge of the water, coffee in hand, watching fish leap occasionally in the distance. But despite the serenity around me, I couldn't shake the tension that lingered from the day before. The HOA's strange obsession with my land had escalated so quickly, and their last warning echoed in my mind like a storm on the horizon. This isn't over.
I was halfway through cleaning up after breakfast when I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel.
This time, however, it wasn't just a car or two. It was louder, more urgent. I stepped out from behind my truck just in time to see flashing red and blue lights cutting through the trees. My heart dropped. A county sheriff's SUV came in too. View first, followed by another squad car. They rolled up quickly and stopped just a few feet from my tent, stirring up a small cloud of dust and pine needles. Two uniformed deputies stepped out, hands resting near their belts, and approached with serious expressions. Behind them, I noticed the white HOA marked SUV parked further down the road, the same woman from earlier standing beside it, arms crossed and looking smug. "Good morning, sir," one of the deputies said firmly. "We received a report of suspicious activity and possible unauthorized occupancy out here. You mind explaining what you're doing on this property?" I kept my voice calm but firm. "Morning, officers. I'm the owner of this ranch. I'm camping on my own land, been here for a few days. Nothing illegal is going on." The second deputy gave me a once-over, then glanced at my gear and tent. "Do you have any ID and proof of ownership?" "Of course." I walked to my truck, pulled out my wallet and the folder that held my land deed and handed them over. The deputy reviewed the documents carefully, while the other kept an eye on the scene. Their demeanor started to soften the moment they saw the official paperwork. "All right," the first deputy said, flipping through the deed. "This looks in order. This parcel isn't even within the HOA's jurisdiction, correct?" "Exactly. That's what I've been trying to tell them." I turned his head toward the woman still standing near her vehicle. "Did you know this was outside the HOA boundary?" "I filed a community safety report," she said defensively. "A concerned resident saw someone camping. Weren't sure if it was a squatter or someone trespassing. We had to take action." Officer frowned. "So you called 911 on the property owner, even after he showed you proof yesterday?" She shifted uncomfortably. "He was aggressive, and the fire pit looked unsafe. It's our duty to report anything that might affect the neighborhood." "That's not how 911 is supposed to be used," the deputy replied bluntly. "Can't use emergency services to settle property disputes, especially not when you've been given clear proof this isn't under HOA control." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but one look from the officer silenced her. He turned back to me and handed over my documents. "Sorry for the trouble, sir. You're within your rights. We'll document this and make sure it's on file. If they bother you again, Feel free to call us directly." "Thank you, officers," I said sincerely. They left shortly after, with the deputies throwing one last warning glance at the HOA rep before driving off. She lingered a moment longer, her pride clearly wounded, before climbing into her SUV and speeding off down the gravel road without another word. As the dust settled, I sat back by the fire pit, trying to process what had just happened. I'd actually called the police on me on my own land. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was done being polite. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It was harassment. It was time to fight back. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing by the lake. I sat in a camping chair, still processing the absurdity of what had just unfolded. The HOA had crossed a line. No, they jumped over it. Calling 911 on a landowner, knowing full well they had no jurisdiction, wasn't just petty, it was dangerous. If I hadn't been calm or didn't have my documents, that encounter could have ended very differently. I wasn't just annoyed anymore, I was furious. And I was ready to act. That evening, after the deputies had left and the dust had finally settled, I made a few calls. First to my attorney, a no-nonsense man who specialized in land rights and property disputes. I sent him the photos and videos I'd taken of the HOA members on my property, their vehicles, and the confrontation with the deputies. Then I emailed the documentation I'd been carrying in my truck, the deed, the original survey maps, and an old letter from the county confirming my land sat outside of Oak Hollow HOA jurisdiction. Within a day, my lawyer responded. He confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no legal authority over my property. Their board members had committed multiple violations: trespassing, harassment, false emergency reporting, and there was plenty of evidence to hold them accountable. He drafted a formal cease and desist letter and sent it to the Oak Hollow HOA office, along with a threat of legal action if they approached my land again. But the fallout didn't stop there. Word spread fast in small communities, especially when police are involved. Within a week, the story was circulating among Oak Hollow residents. Some were shocked the HOA would go that far. Others admitted they weren't surprised. I began receiving messages through mutual acquaintances, people apologizing for the behavior of their board. Neighbors reaching out to say they'd never supported the HOA's obsession with policing everything from mailbox colors to backyard trees. Apparently, this wasn't their first overreach, but it was the first time someone had fought back with proof, patience, and legal action. At the next HOA meeting, it's held at the neighborhood clubhouse, things got heated. I didn't attend. I had no reason to, but I later heard from a resident that the meeting turned into a shouting match. Several board members were questioned by the community, and the president, the very woman who had called 911, was publicly challenged over her abuse of power. Some demanded her resignation. Others called for a complete reevaluation of the board's authority. It was chaos, and it was deserved. About 2 weeks after the incident, I received an official letter in the UHL mail. It was from the HOA, an apology, likely drafted by their legal team. They acknowledged the misunderstanding, admitted their mistake in involving law enforcement, and promised not to engage with my property or activities again. My lawyer advised keeping the letter as a formal admission of wrongdoing, just in case they ever tried anything again. But for me, the message was clear. I had one. In the months that followed, I made a few upgrades to the lakefront. I poured a proper gravel path, installed a wooden dock, and even built a small lakeside cabin complete with solar panels, a porch swing, and a wood-burning stove. No more tents, no more temporary setups. If I wanted peace at my lake, I was going to have it with style. And every time I sat on the porch of that cabin, watching the sun dip behind the hills and listening to the quiet rustle of trees, I smiled. Because I had defended what was mine, not with anger or revenge, but with truth, patience, and a firm stand against people who thought control meant power. In the end, the lake stayed mine, and the peace, well, that returned to just as it always should have.